Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. The Philippines is one of the fastest growing economies in the Southeast Asian region. However, poverty, food security, and climate change remain major challenges, and inclusive growth remains elusive. In recent years, impact enterprises have been emerging as sustainable solutions to these tough development challenges. These market based models not only allow for scale and sustainability, but also bring investments into the economy while ensuring financial governance and maximizing impact. While the number of market based models in the Philippines has been growing, no models have scaled up as the challenges for these entrepreneurs remain vast. There still remains a gap in financing, particularly for seed stage capital. While the ecosystem needs innovative entrepreneurs, it also needs investors who will provide risk capital and fill in the missing middle gap by supporting these entrepreneurs. This is what we'll be talking about today in our event, How to Leapfrog the Philippine Impact Investment Ecosystem. Moderating today's discussion is Greg Perez. Greg is a director at Exchange, an industry agnostic impact investor and incubator for early stage social enterprises in the Philippines. She has handled deals and incubation for exchange portfolio companies in renewable energy, electric vehicles, sustainable fashion, agriculture, fast moving consumer goods, and education. Allow me in welcoming Greg. Hi, Greg. Thanks so much for
Hi,
joining us. I'll pass it on to you to introduce our panelists.
thanks, Kat. Happy to be here today. And welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. So please help me also in welcoming our panelists. First off, we have Priya Thachadi, co-founder and CEO of Villgro Philippines, an early-stage incubator and investor that funds, mentors, and nurtures impact enterprises building innovative solutions to impact the lives of the poor in the Philippines. Next, we have Rico Gonzalez, Managing Director of Exchange and Chairperson of the Board of Ashoka Philippines. In 2011, he founded Exchange with his wife and has since been working with a small team of professionals to collaborate on initiatives and experiments to address the still substantial gaps in the startup ecosystem for social enterprises. And last but not the least, we have Audrey Celian, Director at Artha Impact, an online impact investment platform designed to tackle the economics of due diligence around high impact SMEs. Through Artha Impact, she's committed to proving that investment in good businesses is one of the keys to best serving the underserved on this planet. So, hi, Priya, Rico, and Audrey. I'm looking
Hello.
forward to this conversation.
Hi, Greg. Great to be here.
Hello. Thank you.
So, so we're here to talk about how to leapfrog the Philippine impact investment ecosystem. But before we dive into the question of how, I'd first like to talk about why we need to leapfrog the ecosystem in the first place. So, Priya, let me start with you. As Kath has already mentioned, the Philippines is facing challenges on multiple fronts: health and nutrition, education, poverty, and of course, vulnerable to the effects of the climate crisis, to name a few. What role do impact enterprises play in solving these problems?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think we are coming into this a few weeks after COP26, and there is no greater call and urgency to solve, of course, the climate crisis, but all of the associated development challenges that we are seeing everywhere in the world. But right here at home in the Philippines, I think we really are facing that crisis very, very starkly, as we've seen over the last couple of years, especially even as we dealt with the pandemic. And this is where, I do believe that entrepreneurship plays such a crucial role in really partnering with the traditional approaches of solving some of these challenges. I think there is such a strong role for entrepreneurship, and typically we think about it only in terms of contribution to the GDP and jobs, which is of course very, very important. But they play such a important role in solving social and environmental problems because of the things that I think both you and Kat mentioned. The sustainability, the idea that it's market driven. So there is demand and supply that we are really looking at, and the potential for scale. Our experience with working in a similar ecosystem in India, for example, first before coming here to the Philippines, is that we've seen how impact enterprises and entrepreneurs with the vision and the mission and really the courage to take on solving these really, really big challenges that typically we thought only, governments or large international NGOs with very deep pockets can solve. But entrepreneurs have proven that they have what it takes and they want to contribute to solving these problems. And right here at home in the Philippines, what I'm most excited about is the number of entrepreneurs who have taken it upon themselves to really be part of the solution. But of course, they do face huge challenges, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But we are seeing entrepreneurs really, in the last 2 years, there's a lot of excitement around agriculture. There's a lot around education, skill building. We saw in the pandemic how we struggled here in the Philippines, our health systems, and this is where entrepreneurial models can really come in. And of course, when we talk about climate, the impact enterprise model is looking at a business model, but it's like two sides, right? But impact is on the other side of that coin. And the entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial solutions behind that are valuing both. And that to me really unlocks incredible possibilities of how we can address these really urgent, really generational issues that are not going to be solved by one person or one organization or just the government alone. It requires a far more systems approach. And that's what impact enterprises and impact entrepreneurs are really pursuing. So I'm quite hopeful, despite this really, really difficult time and all of the reports that have really come out. We saw the IPCC report. We saw young people really, really calling leaders to account on the lack of action. And this is where, us as people in the community, as entrepreneurs, this is how we can get involved. And I believe that in the Philippines, we are going to see more and more entrepreneurs really kind of, answer that call to action and really take part in solving these urgent social and environmental problems through the power of entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. Thanks, Priya. Lots of great points. But I think, where I'd really like to dive into is what you were saying about the potential of these models that we're seeing, these market-based solutions. So, Rico, turning to you, impact entrepreneurship in the Philippines has been around for at least 15 years, give or take a few years. However, we have yet to see models that have truly scaled their impact. What challenges do impact entrepreneurs face, what structural bottlenecks are throttling their growth?
Okay, how much time do we have?
How much time? If you could summarize in 5 minutes, I know we could talk about this forever.
Well, the challenges are many, right? The way we think about it at Exchange, there are really two sets of broad challenges that an enterprise has to deal with. There are those that are directly mission related. And this is the risk side of a double-sided coin, the other side of that coin being the opportunity for impact, right? These entrepreneurs, these enterprises are trying to figure out a new way of dealing with a problem. They're trying to find solutions we have not tested before. And so there's a huge amount of experimentation and therefore a huge amount of uncertainty involved in the process. That process needs to get funded because we need these new solutions. A lot of our old efforts at addressing a lot of our long-standing problems like poverty, raising productivity in agriculture, the impacts of climate change, our old solutions have hit the point of diminishing returns. They are no longer adequate to the problems that we face. The problems have evolved, they continue to evolve, our solutions need to evolve with it. And entrepreneurship is the space that allows us to experiment and find new ways of approaching these problems. So that's key. That fundamentally needs to get addressed, and that needs funding, right? So that's one of the core deliveries that we provide as funders in impact. There is another set of risks that I would argue are non-core but are real nonetheless. And these are the risks that relate to doing business in the Philippines. At the end of the day, the solution is not a product that delivers a value proposition. The solution is the enterprise itself surviving and becoming sustainable. And that means they need to figure out accounting, they need to be able to figure out an adequate cash cycle, all of the things that relate to any normal enterprise build also affect a social enterprise. And so you have these two families of risk, families of challenges that need to be addressed. And they're being addressed by entrepreneurs that have very limited resources and therefore need a vast amount or a vast network of collaboration, whether it's assistance through legal advice or professional support, or even just people that are willing to take the risk of working on these teams. That all of that is needed, and all of it needs to get funded.
That's a great short summary of, what are the challenges we're facing. And, I think you really hit on the point. And all of this, the experimentation, hiring the right people, having enough runway, to survive until you figure out your business model, all of that needs to be funded, as you said, and, thus the demand. But what about the supply? So, Audrey, turning to you, I read recently an article, The Missing Middle by the Griffith University Center, and the authors assert that much of the current appetite for impact investment is in comparatively de-risked and ready proposition. So, by virtue of these types of, what these types of capital are looking for, then it limits the type of enterprises that can be invested in. It limits the type of purposes for the capital. There's the return and exit expectations are paramount. So from your experience, do you share this view? From where you sit, what are the challenges and opportunities in impact investing in the region?
Thank you, Greg, for the great question and for the input so far from Priya and Rico, laying the landscape. I'll add my 2 cents to this question. And I think having been on the investor side of the table on behalf of a family office and fund focused on India for the last 15 years, I can say that, investors are herd animals. Even if they call themselves impact investors, they follow each other. And it's true that we need, the rare few who are ready to step out and to lead and to take risk and to try something that others haven't tried. It's one can't, I think, diminish that point. That said, however, every burgeoning ecosystem begins somewhere. And these ideas, these models, as they're being tested, it may be relatively nascent at the moment in the Philippines ecosystem, but I don't doubt for a moment the velocity at which this will change, particularly as we see 1, 2, 3 case studies, 4, 5, 6 stories where capital is injected, is infused, and you see that a model is tested and flexed, and an entrepreneurial team is able to find or hack their way through, coming up with the 5 or 6, critical pieces of support and help that they needed. And once that happens, that will be mimicked, almost instantaneously by others. And so my sense is, yes, I wish I could say differently that the wave of impact investment discernible on the planet today is actually all about, taking risk and going where others haven't gone before. I would say honestly, there's generally a little bit of risk aversion there. That is a real factor when you're looking at really proper scale when it comes to the capital requirements. But arguably, again, I come back to the core point here, and this is why organizations like Villgro are so critically important. Villgro in India as Priya can well attest, has played such a seminal, such a transformational role for the investor space, actually. It's actually created ready pipelines of companies, supported models, and thought leadership and knowledge sharing in a way that's actually catalyzed a community of donors, investors, I think, as one of the oldest social enterprise incubators in the country. So likewise in the Philippines, I see its role and the role of its peers, which I'm sure there will be many, and there are many, as absolutely vital. So I hope that that sheds a little bit of light on what I think the dynamics are.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Audrey. Lots of great insights. I love what you said about, velocity and momentum, and that, it's not just the enterprises or the entrepreneurs who are pioneers here, but also the investors are pioneers and really blazing the trail, and that herd immunity, while currently a challenge, could be then leveraged as an opportunity once the models and the proof points, gain momentum. And so going back to you, Rico, going back to the Philippine perspective, since Exchange started investing in 2011, how has the space changed in the last 10 years? And, building on Audrey's points and Priya's points, what is needed to move the space forward and, to get to the heart of the conversation, to leapfrog the impact investment ecosystem?
That remains a challenging question. We are still today really at the early stages of this build. 10 years on, I'd have to say this is still really early stage. And how you can tell very easily because you don't have a pipeline of mature social enterprises that can be invested in the way you would invest in a publicly listed entity. We're not there yet. The big difference between today and 10 years ago when we started doing this is the caliber of entrepreneurs has improved dramatically. We are seeing better prepared entrepreneurs doing this. And that's key. That's one big difference that we sense. Second, from taking lessons from the exchange portfolio, there is a difference of night and day, even though we're still doing this at the early stage, between what we're doing today and what we did 10 years ago. And that big difference is we now know what we're doing. We're not guessing. At the beginning of this, it was a huge bet. But the portfolio, thank heaven, has had exits. So the big difference today is we know this can be done. This is no longer a shot in the dark. It has been done before. It can be done in the Philippine setting. And that's a huge difference. It's the reason why we started thinking, okay, maybe it's time to open this up, right? And to start letting other people into the learning curve that we've had over these last years, and to give them access to the same pipelines that we're seeing, because this is no longer as risky as it was 10 years ago, even though we are still early on this curve.
That's very encouraging. And yes, while the space is really still nascent, we have what the changes that you're seeing, but also we can look to other markets, as Audrey and Priya have already mentioned, to see what the potential trajectory is. And so turning to you, Audrey and Priya, the same question. From your experience in investing in India, Priya, you've had the chance to see the ecosystem evolve and really flourish. What other ingredients? Rico already mentioned a few, including sharing and opening up, sharing with others what we've learned, sharing deals. What other ingredients need to come into play? Because it's there's no silver bullet, right? And yeah, so Audrey, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to start.
Great.
So thank you for that question, Greg. Really quickly, I think one key ingredient is designing in a holistic way, and not thinking about silver bullets, not thinking that there's one organization that's going to solve the problem, or one investor fund, or one vehicle, or one family that's going to address the scope of the challenge. As they say, none of us is as smart as all of us. It's really about a coordinated but a distributed method, a way to address the information asymmetries uh, that help to disseminate, what's working, the experiences that Rico has on those. It could be, even if it's just a couple of exits, that's such valuable insight and information that others must know about. So I think this is not also about open sharing, open domain networks either. Investors get, I think, notoriously squeamish when you talk about open domain information, things that are wide open for consumption. Everything for investors tends to be, quite carefully guarded. So I think it's striking that balance between having, I guess, some of the specialty, the practitioners in a safe space where they're able to uncover, demystify, understand the opportunities to act, and hopefully to act in concert. Because again, no single investor here is going to move the needle by him or herself. It's going to be in tandem. So for me, it's this emphasis on the ingredient of collaboration and coordination, with hopefully a few fearless leaders starting on the path to show others that all of this is possible.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're living the real life of the Philippines.
Yeah, let me jump in. I was just reflecting on what both Rico and Audrey said, and how do I put it? I think the best way to explain it is really through Villgro's journey in India, and I think that's some reference to it that Audrey made. So we've been investing in India specifically for the last 20 years, and the second decade was so significantly different, just like what Rico is saying, to the first, right? We were not able to make equity investments mostly in that first 10 years. We had to give just mainly grants. And a lot of our investments have actually come in the last 10 years. And a couple of reasons for this. Number one, the entrepreneurs were also very few, and quality significantly varied. And we had to take a lot of risk, and it was kind of impossible to make those type of equity investments and, ask for return from a lot of those entrepreneurs, because it was very, very early stage. So over the last kind of 20 years, it has really kind of changed so much. But what has really worked in the last decade, I have to share. First of all, Villgro has made about 350 investments now, most of them in India. 40% of that portfolio has failed, as in those companies don't exist anymore for a variety of reasons, right? Either there was no product market fit, or the entrepreneurs decided that they need to part ways, or something else. 60% of those companies, I would say within that pot, maybe 20% are kind of in the same stagnating. They're kind of happy where they are, and the rest are continuing to grow. Now, that is a very good numbers, and I think it's really, by virtue of having done this for 20 years, because we take a lot of risk. But that risk is only possible, and we are able to play that role as an incubator at the very, very early stage, where no institutional investor will go, or even angel investors would hesitate, is because we've also been supported by brave donors, and we've been able to use really blended financing before even like this term became popular. Is that we had grant money that we could then use to invest into companies and really absorb a lot of the risk of testing and validating these models, because investors will not go when you don't have at least certain amount of proof points. And that is sometimes difficult to understand in a young ecosystem, because entrepreneurs are applying for funding, they keep getting rejected. But it's because there is this gap between where the entrepreneurs are at, and this is, I think, especially true here in the Philippines, and where the investors are at. The investors' risk appetite doesn't match where the entrepreneurs are at, because they are still experimenting, as Rico was saying, right? And for that, we really need risk capital. So where can this risk capital come from? And that, I think, is the challenge that we're having here in the Philippines. In India, we were fortunate. There were donors, and then we also partnered, with Artha and others who were also okay to really back entrepreneurs at the early stages. We don't have that here yet in the Philippines, and it's evolving. And through initiatives like the Impact Pioneers, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit, we really are trying to, as Rico said, open it up and let more people come in and really share a little bit of that risk. But unless we are able to put in that risk capital and back entrepreneurs who are showing very early potential, we don't know yet if they're going to succeed. But we are seeing, the basics in the model, the kind of commitment from the entrepreneurs to see it through, because it's not impact enterprises, unlike tech startups, purely tech startups are not going to grow at that rate, which means there's more to figure out in the last mile delivery, getting the pricing right. And so what kind of capital can really back that experimentation? And that's where we are facing this big gap. So here in the Philippines, what we really need to see is more blended financing. So we need capital that can actually absorb this risk. We need, of course, more angel investors, because that's angel investors it's really up to them. It's really their personal risk, their personal assessment, which is very different from institutional or venture capital, which follows a different type of model, and they need very specific market returns that they've promised to their investors. So we really need to crowd in and really help each other, and help the entrepreneurs with risk capital, with the support, through very interesting mechanisms. I think the impact investment ecosystem, as Audrey was saying, of course, there is like the herd mentality, but there are a few brave souls out there who are trying some very interesting things, all of which can be very relevant for us here in the Philippines. But that just means that, it cannot be, an exchange and a Villgro only. We need far more people. We need more individuals really coming into this space. And we also need donors who are willing to see that the ecosystem needs to be built. So, for example, we've partnered with USAID, who have really thought about how can we really make risk capital better, right? How do we bring in more investors? And we are working together on a first loss guarantee fund that hopefully will unlock more local capital for entrepreneurs. So we have to go out of the box, and it's really uncomfortable, and it's really risky. But I think the way to do it is together. Because ultimately, this whole week we're celebrating the startup ecosystem, right? If we want to see Filipino startups succeed, if we want to see impact at scale, we need to back entrepreneurs with funding at the time that they need it. Sorry, it's a little bit long, but just wanted to share.
No, that's all great points. And I'm glad you mentioned the Impact Pioneers Network, right? As you were saying, we need more Villgros and more exchanges, more Arthas. We are the pioneers right now, but hopefully, when more people join us, and this is really the core of our work, right? More people to join us, then this becomes the dominant model, and then the herd will follow and follow our lead. That's the bet, at least. And we'll come back to you later to talk a bit more about the Impact Pioneers Network. But I'm so excited also, to talk about the Artha platform, and for us to partner with Audrey and your team. And, of all the things that we mentioned in terms of the challenges, so the platform and the Impact Pioneer Network, how then does this platform address some of the challenges that we've discussed? And you touched on this a bit already about the centralized but distributed hub. But could you highlight for us, some exciting features that we can expect to see, whether you're on the investor side or the entrepreneur side?
Sure, Greg, happy to. So the tool that we're talking about is basically a version of a platform that is multi-sided, that we had set up in India about 12 years ago for the first time. And it was really designed for those of us who are funder, investor, donor types who are sitting a little bit further away from our target pipeline. And the truth is, it's going to take a mix of those players like Exchange who are right there on the ground, and then those who are, potentially sitting on the outside in various types of structures and vehicles, willing to also dip in a toe possibly to co-invest or match invest. Let me share a few of the the kind of features of what we're talking about on the system. One of them is about really just standardizing the profiling of the different companies. So the system is not just about profiling investors or profiling enterprises. It's also about profiling support organizations like Villgro, as well as service providers on the ground. So those anyone who wants to do a transaction, an investment, or make a donation, even on the ground in a country where they're not sitting, will realize quickly that you need to have local partners. You need to have people there on the ground who can help you to ascertain, how things are done. It could be anything from understanding legal details and having counsel to technical assistance and auditing ability. So this system is designed to be able to profile every one of these types of players in a standard way so that anyone who logs in can look across that landscape virtually and just see who's there. So that's just first and foremost the initial feature that we aim to bring into any ecosystem where our SaaS tool is being used. So it's a bit of simple mapping. There are also essentially multiple doorways into the platform where local accelerators or even investors can feed the pipeline with projects that they feel strongly about. The other element is that each profile lends itself to offering a deal when an enterprise can make explicit the kind of funding that it needs and for what purpose. So an enterprise can essentially create a deal and then places itself in a searchable pipeline of the opportunities that investors can then review. The other thing that the platform supports is tenders for support. And these can be launched by any user type.
So while we're waiting for Audrey, that's very exciting, and I'm looking forward to the demo that we're sharing later. And to me, it sounds like it's really going to help lower the barriers to entry to entrepreneurship. And because part of that is they don't know how to talk to investors, or what is a term sheet, or where do I find the investors, and kind of bringing the ecosystem together, mapping that, and having them in the platform. That's really exciting. So turning
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
you,
I think
yeah,
maybe I
go
can
Priya.
chime in.
Sure.
I think one of the fundamental challenges in a young ecosystem like the Philippines is, we all have to accept that startup ecosystems tend to be fairly elitist. It has silos. So unless you're plugged into certain networks, it's frankly impossible to find out about certain types of investors, or even find out what are the opportunities, right? So information asymmetries really are very, very strong. That's one. Second, we have to admit there's a lack of transparency around investments itself and really what happens. So we don't know who is investing in what companies are, recently we've started finding out about, some tech investments, but also what are the kind of terms that are being given out. There's not enough kind of discussion, between entrepreneurs sometimes about this, because this is all kind of private information. So there's a lot of, lack of transparency, murkiness. And sometimes what we're seeing with early stage entrepreneurs is that they also don't understand a lot of these terms. I think, Greg, you kind of referred to this. And which means they're sometimes getting into deals where, it's really not beneficial to them in the longer term. It might solve their immediate kind of cash crisis, but really not helping them build for scale. Some of the terms that I've really stopped many entrepreneurs just even last month from signing off on certain term sheets, because they actually didn't understand the implications of this. And in many cases, the entrepreneurs also, the investors also don't, because they're also quite new to this, right? So they're really thinking about risk profiling at that point. And this is all, it's not only with a malicious intent or anything, it's really just symptoms of a very young ecosystem. And hence, we really need to build that sense of transparency. We need to talk about this more. And I think that's where the power of a platform like this really, really comes in. where we can see, who are the entrepreneurs who are looking for capital, who are some of the investors. I recently came from an entrepreneur session with women entrepreneurs where they said that, they are unsure of, who is an impact investor and whether they should actually, this is the person that they should be talking to, because then the values don't align. I'm sure, Rico, you've seen a lot of this as well. But yeah, these are all real struggles for entrepreneurs. And it's really not always about just a quality pipeline. I think that's what always gets like the that's what hits the news, and that's a discussion, right? Oh, like, where are the entrepreneurs in the Philippines? They're here, but the capital is not doesn't have the risk appetite to invest in them. And then there is also a very serious lack of experience, because we are a young ecosystem around early stage deals, right? A pre-series A, seed stage, an angel round. And that has led to a lot of problems. And if you talk to any entrepreneurs, they will tell you like 10 instances of like bad experiences where they don't want to fundraise, which is also not good for us as an ecosystem, because, in India, it took us 20 years, the last 20 years to get to the mature stage where we are. It really shouldn't take us another 10 more years to kind of get there. I believe we can leapfrog. What do you think, Rico?
I was just going to add the timing of this. The timing of this offering is also indicative of where we are in this build, right? Something like this would not have made sense 10 years ago, because it was hugely experimental, and we were doing largely disjointed deals, right? But we are faced with a situation now where there are more entrepreneurs to deal with, and there is a need to kind of get to a common ground. And that's why this makes sense. But that also tells you that we're kind of at an inflection point in this whole build for the ecosystem, right? Not only are there more entrepreneurs, we're betting that there's more interest because they are bumping into investors, right? And there is a need to kind of organize these conversations so we start to have some commonalities in the way this is done, right? So, I wish I could say it's looking like an easy build, but I think the timing is very good.
Yeah, I was just going to say I was in a similar conversation that Priya described, and a lot of the entrepreneurs are not even aware of the spectrum. So exchange being on the impact first side, and some investors being more impact investors being on the more commercial side. And what are you looking forward to, Rico? In terms of the specific use cases of this platform.
I think just being able to share the deals, right? Just being able to have everybody kind of get onto the same page, as it were, on these deals, so that we start to, we would always get questions like, what does it mean when you say you're impact investing? Because all of the deals are hugely different. That's part of the excitement of doing this, right? I mean, you're doing it for a good cause, but it's also, I have to admit, quite fun. um, and I think a lot of the challenges, if you're doing it alone, it can seem very daunting, particularly if it's not something you've done before. So there's a huge benefit to doing this together, and the platform allows that. It also makes for greater visibility, not only for the deals, but for the terms. And there's a learning curve, as Priya pointed out, to this on the investor side. And I think to get into the groove, to kind of do this more and at larger scales, we're going to need to get into this rhythm together. And that's very hard to do in a highly fragmented ecosystem, which is what tends to happen at the very early stages of an ecosystem build, right? So something that helps us collaborate and helps us coordinate and just helps us understand each other as we're doing this, and helps entrepreneurs figure us out collectively,
Yeah.
I think is going to be a huge addition to this build.
So in a way, we are creating our own herd. And Audrey really latched into that that insight of yours. So going back to you, Audrey, in terms of how your platform, the Artha platform, has catalyzed the ecosystem in other markets, are there some exciting stories of use cases, or basically stories of how the platform has catalyzed in other markets that you can share with us?
Just in terms of your question, I think success for us, success of the use of a tool manifests when there are investors who are able to share their processes of diligence, where they can say that I'm interested in this local artisanal group, or any kind of sector, any kind of intervention, and to be able to show to others that their work is underway, that they've discovered X, Y, or Z, that they have a process underway, and that it's a process that it may be closed to others initially in the first round, but it's something that at least one can see that it has happened. That's the benefit of public markets, right? In public markets, when you're looking at listed securities, you can see the 25 investors and the 50 equity analyst research reports that have been written about XYZ company. All of it is laid out in front of us. Whereas in private placement, and particularly private placement for impact or for good, everything that pertains to the development sphere, essentially, none of that ever shows. It's highly idiosyncratic information. It's highly guarded information. So in a sense, the system is really successful when these processes, some of the parts of these processes can be opened up. So we have co-invested systematically in the last 22 transactions that we've done in India, for example. Every single one of those transactions, either we're a co-investor on the back of another lead, or we may have led and opened it up to others. It's very concrete, and it may or may not happen. We're not purists in the sense that this has to happen on a tool, on a platform, in any particular format. It doesn't matter how it happens. As long as the visibility is there, that one can see. Our assumption is that having a multi-sided tool that's free to access for profiled registered users, I mean, those users can't be anyone. They should be folks who are curated and understood by a master administrator. But when that visibility is there, the likelihood that folks will reach out to one another is a little bit higher. That's really all we're aiming for. There are no major lofty goals here. But back to that functionality I was trying to describe, it's about ensuring that if somebody's going to go through the trouble of understanding and doing a diligence on a local business in, I don't know, in Batan or whatever, like allow it to be visible so that others can also come and have a look, particularly if those others are sitting in other countries, so that in the end, the cost of their business class ticket and their stay at a hotel doesn't actually exceed the needs of the local business that we're talking about. That's what we were seeing in India. We still see this all the time. There are hundreds of investors who fly in and fly out. It's the most inefficient model ever. And for those of us who are doing it for impact and development, it's our responsibility to trust one another and save some of those costs and put the money in the actual businesses instead of on our own processes. So just that really to share as examples of the use of the system in our own portfolio and some of the benefits that we think it may confer on the ecosystem.
Those are really great points, Audrey. And yes, definitely, as impact investors, we have to hold ourselves to a higher level, not just the costs, but even the carbon footprint. And as you were saying, the efficiencies and all of that is important. And so, this has been a great conversation. We've talked about the whys and the hows. And moving to a more personal note, Rico, if I may ask you, I think there's a certain type of person who wants to become an impact investor. Would love to get your thoughts on this, right? We're getting these signals that people want to help, they don't know how. As Audrey was saying, then this becomes more visible, makes it possible that they can see the deals, as you mentioned. But what's really at the core, I mean, for you, what what's driven your commitment for the last 10 years, and what's the best thing about this journey?
That's a particularly challenging question. Um, how do I go about answering that? I think most people, if they stop and reflect about their lives and how their lives have progressed, will come to a point at some point in their lives where they ask themselves, how do I give back? How do I build the common good for the community that has brought me this far? But I find that while that thought process occurs with a very broad pool of people, there is a further point of reflection in the conversation that goes beyond just wanting to help, right? And if you're the type of person, if you stop and reflect, and you're the type of person who is not satisfied with just the sense of, I've given some money back and therefore I'm good, but actually want to see the difference happen. If you are fixated on getting to outcomes, not just, oh, I gave some money here and I can sleep now because my guilt is gone, then you have to start thinking about investing, right? Because a lot of our problems are not going to go away with a small donation here or a small donation there. A lot of our problems are going to get solved by persistent action on a focused point, whatever that problem is. And that's what enterprises are able to do, that a small donation here and there can't. Disjointed philanthropy is still philanthropy, but it's not as effective as if you stop to think strategically and said, okay, how do I actually get from point A to point B? How do I shave off percentages off of the poverty statistics? How do I actually address communities that are getting impacted by climate change in tangible ways? Right? You need organizations that build social value, build impact over time. And that means you've got to build organizations, right? So there's a big part of this that is really stop and think about the philanthropy that you're already oriented to and be more strategic about it. And that is, I think, naturally going to bring you from disjointed donations to investment. So that's one aspect of this. The other aspect of this is, I kind of mentioned earlier, this is fun, right? I had the occasion before doing this of building our own business. And that, to me, that was an eye-opener because it was extremely difficult. And at the time, it felt like an ordeal. But emerging from that, I realized I wanted to do it more. But, how many times am I going to be building organizations myself? So one of the things that investing has allowed me to do, it has allowed me to work with entrepreneurs, to be part of their journey without having to do the all-nighters myself anymore. Right? I'm not the guy who's up at 2 a.m. trying to make sure that the servers are going to work the next day, right? That's them now. But I get to sit down with them and be part of that journey. And that is an exceptional opportunity, right? And the thing to remember is when you're dealing with social entrepreneurs, when you're dealing with impact enterprises, these are these entrepreneurs are amazing people. And this is that I really enjoy. Being able to sit down and talk strategy with these people, there's nothing that compares to it. So, you don't have to like jump into this completely blind, and you don't have to jump into it, all in on day one. One of the things that Impact Pioneers allows you to do is to get a small taste of it first, get comfortable, and then do it again and again and again and again. And I promise you, if this is something that floats your boat, you're going to enjoy the journey.
Very well said. Thank you, Rico. I do feel every day that it is a privilege to be doing the work that we do, to have this opportunity to help and to have fun and to work alongside these entrepreneurs who are, who are very courageous and trying to make a difference in the world. So with that, maybe Audrey, some final thoughts on, why should investors today, or why should they join us today and be part of this movement that we are embarking on together? This partnership, Exchange and Villgro, building the Impact Pioneers Network, Artha, with the platform, really powering that. Just some final thoughts, and then I'll turn to Priya.
Thank you, Greg. I think Rico's words were so powerful. My sense is that any impact investor who really wants to live by that moniker, to actually put into practice that they are really impact investors, in a sense, the call for action is when the ecosystems are nascent. It's when the impact is the highest. It's when the concentrations are low and the learning curves are steep and the impact is high, arguably. So stepping in and being a leader there confers one this advantage, in a sense, this status, which is not the same thing after everybody's taken the risk and 15 years have passed and suddenly you have 25 excellent quality pitches coming out of Villgro's iPitch program, which is what we've just seen, by the way, about a week or two ago. So in essence, if, this is in some sense the truest opportunity for the calling of the impact investor. And everything that Rico just said resonated so deeply with me. And I was reminded of this documentary I've seen. It's called Happy. Some years ago. It's a short documentary about well-being, human well-being outcomes, and in a sense, not only is it fun, the actual work, but in some sense, it transcends the giving back, because that act of actually engaging and interacting is so fulfilling. I just don't think there are better drivers for one's own well-being outcomes. You can't be involved in this work and get depressed and at the state of the world when you see so much energy and optimism. It could be youthful, it may not be youthful, it may be older folks doing this. Doesn't matter. This is where it's at. This is where, the very edge of, the precipice where you're standing looking at change. It's amazing. So I think for a multitude of reasons, engaging right now couldn't be more advisable, couldn't be more fascinating and interesting, and also potentially be a strategy that yields some incredibly promising returns.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Audrey. And yes, these entrepreneurs give us hope. Priya, turning to you, final thoughts. Why is now the time to become an impact investor?
Hard to put it in better words than what Rico and Audrey said. I think I was so deeply moved by what they both shared. But I think just to reiterate, we're coming. This is year 2 of the pandemic, and it has not been easy. It has been extremely difficult everywhere in the world, and here in the Philippines, we've seen how it's affected our health systems. For months and months. People have not had jobs in the informal economy. Not everyone has been fortunate to be on a digital platform like this and go to work. That has meant that the problems that we've had in society, the challenges that we've had in our ecosystems have only deepened. And we know that the status quo was not good. So where do we go from here? We have to go with urgency, because our planet is not at a state where we can wait and have promises that are 50 or 60 years down the road. We have to build back better, because what we had was not good enough. And if the pandemic and what's happening to the climate and this extreme weather that we are experiencing on a daily basis is not a wake-up call, then there is nothing else, right? And so the urgency of solving our social and environmental challenges, it is in our face. We are already past the point of action. So we really have to be only thinking about urgent action and response. And as we've discussed over the last hour, entrepreneurship plays such a key role, and social entrepreneurs or impact enterprises play a role in that. So really for us for those of us, who want to give back, this is the opportunity to get involved. Here in the Philippines, we have entrepreneurs who are every day putting themselves out there. They are going and figuring out how to deliver last mile, how to build more inclusive communities, how to improve the incomes of farmers, how to really deal with climate change. But they need support, and this support is an opportunity for those of us who want to get involved in the impact sector. We can continue to do our traditional strategies. We can continue to support those models. None of this is at conflict with each other. But entrepreneurship has the power to really create change at scale, that like nothing else. And we have seen this happen in India. Over the last 20 years, we've dedicated our time, our efforts, money into this, and we've seen entrepreneurs go from impacting 10 farmers to 100 farmers to millions of farmers, for example. So it is possible, and impact entrepreneurship is the way to do that. So the reason that we've all come together, Rico, Audrey, Greg, and I, is really to bring and create this platform, Impact Pioneers, as a way where we can come together collectively, because that's the only way forward for us, to really build our economy, our country, improve the social situation, but also, honestly, as a planet, we have only this one home. We've got to give it everything, and we owe it to the next generation to leave a better world. So the Impact Pioneers platform is really an opportunity for us as investors to come together, to keeping all of the business fundamentals in place, taking the risks that we can. But when we do co-invest, when we do bring our collective efforts together and streamline and really eliminate all those inefficiencies that Audrey was talking about, we can then support these entrepreneurs who are on the ground doing this work. And there's no better way to give back, right? You can actually, as Rico was explaining, really be involved in building those models. You can then partner with others so you can get your returns. So this really is the platform that we are bringing together, because we believe that we should all collaborate more. Unfortunately, it happens that, of course, the impact sector and all the players, we all have great intentions, but sometimes, we are in our silos. And here is an opportunity for us to come together. And my really call to action to everybody is, for entrepreneurs, reach out. There are those who want to support you. I know it may not always seem like that, but there are not only intentions, but also actions to back that. And for investors or those who are thinking about how to really get involved in this space, here's an opportunity to test it out a little bit, and then really come together. So really, it takes a village, it takes a community to build, and this is a community we really invite you all to join us.
Wonderful. And that's the perfect way to close this inspiring and inspired session. Thank you so much, Priya, Rico, Audrey, for being with us this afternoon. And back to you, Cam.
Thank you so much, Priya, Audrey, Rico, and Greg, for moderating such a fantastic conversation on how we can all work together to leapfrog the Philippine impact investment ecosystem. We are very, very excited to be launching the Impact Pioneers Network today. And so I would like to invite everybody to join us at the interactive stage to learn more about the Impact Pioneers Network, to see the functionalities of our new virtual platform, and to also head on to invest.impactpioneers.ph to sign up and join us on our journey. Thank you all, and see you all at the interactive stage.